In the previous lesson, we touched on some of the advantages of working with layers here in CorelDRAW X4. Now we're going to see those advantages in action as we explore some of the layer properties. I'm still working with my Green Onion certificate here. If you've jumped to this lesson and you need to get caught up and you do have the exercise files, you can go to the Lesson 7 folder, open up gocertificate2.cdr, and you'll have what I have. Over here in the Object Manager, which we've opened up, we can see that with our Layer Manager view selected, we can see the different pages. We've got a master page and only one page, and on page 1, we've got several layers that we created in the previous lesson. So our text is separated from our objects, which is separated from our background. So one of the advantages we talked about was screen refresh or redraw rates. When you're working with a page that has multiple objects and some of them very complex, and you make a simple change to one object, the entire drawing has to be refreshed to show those changes. And that can eat up system resources and slow you down. Well, thanks to this little guy right here, the little eyeball next to our various layers, we can turn off certain layers to isolate the layer we want to work on and speed up the process. So let's say we wanted to work with some of the objects. Well, we could hide the text by clicking the eyeball on the text layer and do the same for our background layer. And here are the objects. So if I just wanted to work on an object like maybe it was this curve all the way around the outside, this rectangle, and I want to change the color. Well, as soon as I make a change, like right-clicking on red, for example, I see that change much faster than if I had all of those other objects visible on my screen. I'm going to click Undo because I actually like the original color. And to get those layers back, we just go to the eyeballs that are now closed and open them back up to make those other layers visible. I'm going to minimize my objects layer so I can see all of my layers here nice and neat down the right-hand side. All right, I'm going to deselect by clicking off the page and talk about the next advantage when you're printing. Let's say I wanted to get a preview of what this is going to look like, just the text. So I'm working with the text, and the background and the objects, they're fine, but I want to be able to manipulate the text. Well, we know that we can turn off our objects and background, or at least hide them by clicking the eyeballs. If this is all I wanted to print out, I could do the same with the printer icon. So I'm going to turn those objects back on and the background back on, but turn off the printing by clicking the printer icon next to objects as well as background. So with those turned off, now I know that if I was to print this entire file, all I would see is the text. Need some proof? Let's go up to the File menu and down to Print Preview. Print Preview, I want to answer yes to adjusting the printer automatically, shows me I'm just going to get this text. That's all I'm going to see in the printout on my 8.5 by 11 inch sheet of paper here. So when I'm done, I click my Close button up here to close the print preview. I'm back to my original, and I'm going to turn my printers back on because eventually when I'm done, I'll want to print all those layers together to my printer. So just working with the text layer and just printing the text layer, obviously it's going to print faster. It's not going to waste any ink. I'll be able to get a nice preview of what the text is going to look like if I'm happy I turn these others back on. In my opinion, the biggest advantage to working with layers is the ability to lock certain layers so that they cannot be changed. I'm thinking of my background, for example. If I wanted to select something like this border right here, this yellow border that goes around the inside of my gift certificate, and I want to move it over to the left. Well, it's very thin, so I might miss it, and when I click and drag and start moving, well, I just happen to get it there. If I click and drag a little too high, you can see I've actually got the background moving. So I want to undo that and click Undo again to move everything back into position. And let's try that again. Deselect. I want to go right to the yellow line, click and drag, and whoops, I've moved my background again. Control Z on the keyboard to undo that. So you could see how that could waste a lot of time. Well, why not just lock the background? Instead of locking an object, where if you want to go back and make changes to the object, you have to unlock it, with your Object Manager open, it's very easy just to lock the entire background. So I click the little minus sign here to collapse that and click the pencil next to background. And when I do that, now it's as if it's not even there. So if I go right in here to my background and click and drag, you can see I'm getting what I wanted, which is that rectangle. If I come up here and try to drag the background, I can't. I can't move it. It's not editable. I can't make changes to it. It's beautiful. So you can always lock or unlock by clicking the pencil when you need to go in and make changes any layer on any page. I'm going to minimize my objects now. So I'm seeing my layers, text, objects, and background. Now one thing about printing and exporting are very similar. Let's say you were going to share this with somebody who only had Adobe Illustrator and you wanted to give them just the text to work on. Well, when you click on the little printer icon next to objects and background, we know that when we do a print preview, we're only going to see the text. Well, when you do an export to Adobe Illustrator format, you're only going to be exporting the text. Same thing as printing. Because our printer icons have no signs through them for objects and background, they don't get exported to Adobe Illustrator. So you hand off the text for someone to work on it, they give it back to you, you bring it in, and then you deselect your printers for exporting the entire file the next time. Let's go up to the top here because we've got some buttons for showing object properties as well as editing across layers. Right now, text is my current layer. I know because it's red. If yours isn't, just click on text and then click down here in the white space in your object manager to deselect, and when you see text in red, you know it's the current layer. That means if I go up to this button where it says edit across layers and I click on that, I won't be able to edit objects or the background, just text. And if I expand my objects, look at that, they're not even selectable. Same thing for my background. So that's another way to kind of lock your background by changing the properties right at the very top for all of your layers. When you need to edit across all the layers, you click that button again to turn it back on. So that's a great way to edit layers. Now when I click on a plus sign, let's say next to objects here, I've got several objects on the objects layer. Right now I can see next to curve, for example, and as I hover over it, it says fill, none, outline, yellow. Some of it's getting cut off over there. I can go to the left border of my Docker. When I see the double arrow, click and drag that over to the left a little bit so I can see more. Those are the object properties. Now, if that looks cluttered to you and you don't need to see them, you can always turn your object properties off and on using this first button up at the top. If you like them, click it again. If you don't, turn them off. And that goes for all of your layers. You can do the same thing for each layer. Turn them off and on. So notice the background. I don't see them. Click the button. I do see them. So it's really your preference, what you like to see. I'm going to minimize my text layer. Click the minus sign next to objects as well as background to minimize all of those layers. So just some of the advantages and how you adjust some of the properties of your layers. There's one more I want to show you that's new here in CorelDRAW X4, and that is the guides. You'll notice for master page we do have guides. So when we typically would use guidelines by clicking and dragging from our ruler down into our drawing area, we would have guidelines and then we'd add a new page and we'd see those same guidelines. So let's try that. I'm going to click and drag from up here. I'm going to drag this guideline down to the top. I'm going to drag one from my vertical ruler on the left over to the edge of my gift certificate. Let's do another one over here on the right. And another one down at the bottom. So from the top, we drag it down to the bottom. There, just like that. So we've got our 4 guidelines in there now. Notice that they show up here on the guides layer. But when I go to the next page, by clicking the plus sign here, I create a new page, I don't see those guidelines. I can create different sets of guidelines on different pages thanks to this guides layer, which actually appears on the page. Now, if I go down to guides here and make that the active layer, turns red, and I bring in a guideline, let's say down the middle here, I'm actually doing it for every page. So now when I go back to page 1, I'll see my guidelines as well as the one I just added under master page here. So you've got the ability to use both if you wanted to. When I click on a guideline, I can delete it by hitting my delete key. I'm going to leave those in there on my page, knowing that if I create a new page, I won't see those guidelines. I can use different ones. So just some of the advantages to layers and some of the properties. Click the minus sign anytime you want to minimize. Notice that guides don't print. They are visible and you can edit them unless you don't want to. Clicking the pencil locks them into position. I like that feature too. So you should be feeling comfortable now with some of the properties as well as those advantages of using layers. We're going to move on to the master layer in the next lesson.